The striker move is hotting up as Newcastle are linked with a move for Jorgen Strand Larsen once again. Then the deal for Yoane Wissa seems to be in the balance. We'll be discussing all of that, plus a preview of the Liverpool game on today's episode of NUFC Transfer Daily. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Welcome back to another video. Please do hit subscribe and like on this video if you haven't already. Join the community. We surpassed 1,800 subscribers yesterday and also 250,000 views on the videos too. I'm so pleased with that. It's all really changed this summer and I'm really hoping we can keep that momentum going over the season. Today we are going to be looking once again at the striker situation. That's all we're really probably going to be talking about on these pods until the end of the window, because Newcastle have pretty much done everywhere else now. They've got their defender in, they've got their winger in, they've got their keeper in, they've got their midfielder in. They just need that striker, at least one striker, because the Alexander Isak thing's going on. But there's something really interesting with the narrative that's happened since the statement battle of 2 days ago. And yesterday I talked about gentlemen's agreements and all that sort of thing, so go and check that video out. The narrative has gone in one direction since the statements were released. And there's a really good video before I get going on YouTube by Adam Cleary on his football channel, which is absolutely brilliant for tactics. And he is a brilliant football mind, I think. And he's very good on True Faith. The few times I've spoken to him on there, he's a great guy, Adam, and his channel is absolutely fantastic. I couldn't recommend it highly enough for tactics and insight. But his video on why Alexander Isak has not moved to Liverpool yet, and the sort of tit for tat with narrative between Liverpool agents, reporters, everything, and it goes back to what I said about agendas and why people say certain things at certain times and why you hear certain things in the media. You know, there's lots of ulterior motives, which is what I've spoken about before. So don't believe everything you read. And that's what I try and sort of stick to on this channel. Sometimes maybe I let my own opinions get in the way sometimes, and you know that's what narrative is. It's set by people, and this is my space to do that. So if you don't like it, I fully understand it. But I don't tend to try and sensationalize things. I try and break things down in a way that is more calm and more objective. And that's what Adam has really done in that video. Even as a Newcastle fan, he's really been very good with how he's approached that video. So I will link that in the description for you, because I think it's a fantastic example of what's gone on this summer with the Isak stuff. But in terms of what has happened since those statements, you know, it feels like Newcastle have shut the door on replacing Isak. They've bid for Yoan Wissa and that was rejected. Apparently then he was back in training yesterday. There was a picture that circulated, which I can't verify. Let me know if you have seen that and what you think on that. But if he's back in training and that feels like it's at an impasse, I think Newcastle, there's a great piece by Chris Woff in The Athletic, again, friend of the channel, explaining the striker situation. And what he says about Yoan Wissa is really interesting, that the age and the profile has sort of dictated the bids that have been made for him, and obviously his contract situation has not gone over £35 million plus add-ons, which is where I think the value is for Yoan Wissa. I know he's a great striker. I know he's done really well over the last couple of years, double figures for 2 seasons, 19 goals last season, none of which were penalties, is a really, really good return for a player who can play across the front. He can come in immediately. He's desperate to play for Newcastle. There are lots of reasons why you would go for Yoan Wissa. I do not, as I said yesterday, condone his behaviour in any way towards Brentford, and I think he should be made to train, he should be made to play, all of those things that I said yesterday. But if Newcastle are moving on, where are they moving on to? And it's not to find an Alexander Isak replacement. They're still steadfastly looking at Callum Wilson replacements, and that has taken them, by the sounds of it, in the direction of Jorgen Strand Larsen. There was a report from the local Wolves press yesterday that Newcastle have had conversations with intermediaries over a £60 million deal, and Wolves are battling to keep hold of the striker that they only signed on a permanent deal for about 25 million quid a few weeks ago. He's had a great season, scored 14 goals in the Premier League last season, 13 goals for Celta Vigo in La Liga the season before. And this is before I get on to Strand Larsen, why I think that this might be a good deal, might be a good thing. I do want to say that there's evidence that in there that Newcastle should really have spent this money and looked at, and they are looking in Europe for alternatives as well. But they should have looked at this deal as an opportunity to take a little bit of a risk. There was a great comment in the section yesterday, a little bit of a conversation about how replacing Wilson is one thing and replacing Isak is another. I think that that's absolutely true. If you're thinking of this as a Moneyball situation and you're thinking about the goals that you've got to replace between Isak and Wilson, if you keep Isak and that's 23 Premier League goals, what are you replacing in Wilson? You're replacing an FA Cup goal at Birmingham. There's no goals in the league, and he really didn't offer anything. In the league, he looked like he was a spent force. So the opportunity on that to improve is it's a blank canvas, really. You know, like there's an opportunity to take a few risks and find a player who's got a little bit of pedigree but needs that chance to step up. And as I said, Calumiendo is just going. Forrest, I mentioned, is a good example. Evan Gesson, we've spoken about him on the channel as well. Those types of players that we've spoken about so many times on this channel this summer. And Strand Larsen is one of those players because he came in from Celta Vigo last season on loan, and then they bought him for a tiny fraction of what Newcastle are going to buy him without him playing an extra game. And I think that's really what, or at least a link with that, and I'm not saying it's going to happen, but that's where I think Newcastle should have been more brave with this choice of where they went for. And like I said right at the start, I mean, Paul Mitchell's long gone, but the perfect opportunity to balance his work with Eddie Howe's was to go and sign somebody like Elanga or Chow, obviously, if that's what Eddie Howe was on board with, and then give Paul Mitchell the remit to go and find somebody in Europe and scout someone from a different market for the second striker and for maybe the midfielder or a different position. Obviously, I'm really happy with Jacob Ramsey. I think he's a great signing. I think he's the signing of the summer in so many reasons and in so many ways, and I've written about that for Forbes. But there are a couple of opportunities of players who could have been from a different market and given a platform to shine. They are still hell-bent on signing players who are plug-in and play, and Strand Larsen, I think you could say that now because he scored 14 goals in the league last season. He's a really powerful physical specimen. He can get on the end of crosses, which is ideal. He's a different sort of player to Isak, and he can change the game. He can play probably with Isak as well. He's more along the lines of what Wilson was doing, but in a different way. He comes alive in the box, and he really would, I think, suit Newcastle's style of play. So is this a good deal for Newcastle if it's £60 million? Practically in terms of value, as I've said in previous videos, I don't think it is. £60 million, I don't think he's ever going to be worth that when you look at players who, you look at, that was what Newcastle effectively played for Sandro Tonali, is about what they paid for Isak himself. But at the same time, he's more proven than Isak was because he's scored goals in the Premier League. So there's a very different ways you can look at it. But for me, he's never going to really be worth £60 million. But in the context of it, if he's a Wilson replacement, you've got to look at it from Wolves' perspective. As I said yesterday, it really kind of accepts, if they sell him, that they're going to be in real trouble this season. And also, Newcastle are desperate for a striker, and it's late in the window, and he is Premier League proven. All of those things, and 24, all of those things add up to £60 million deal. And unfortunately, in a similar way to the discussion went with Elanga, that's kind of how it really does feel like you've got to justify it in that way. For me, the crucial difference is if it's a Wilson replacement, it's a power move. If it's a Wilson replacement, they're going to Wolves and saying, you can have the money and we'll take the player and we'll move on. He'll come in and support our real star striker, and he can come in and grow with that team. If he replaces Isak and Newcastle go and find somebody else, that's a weak moment. And I think this is what I mean about the narrative, and this is what I mean about what Newcastle are aiming to do. It feels like they've shut down the Isak talk now because if they now sell Isak to Liverpool, I think Liverpool will test the resolve one more time. I think next week is going to be the final pivotal moment with Isak. I think we'll know before the deadline, we'll know before Leeds whether he's going to be at the club, and I wonder if he'll be reintegrated around the Leeds game for that reason. If he is still at Newcastle, if Newcastle were to replace Isak with Strand Larsen now, it would really show weakness. It said yesterday it's a pride thing for the club, it's a pride thing for the owners not to sell Isak at this stage. I think the statement that he put out has strengthened that, only hardened their stance. So I don't see that happening. But if he replaces Isak, he's just never going to be on the same level. If he replaces Wilson, though, it's a really good upgrade, and it's two strikers that can come in and score Premier League goals, and he probably deserves a chance at a higher level, and it's an opportunity for him. So I think, yeah, it would be a decent deal. Is the Yoane Wissa deal dead? I would never say never, but it does feel like Newcastle have got to their limit in terms of what they're willing to spend on him because of his age, because of his contract status. Even though there could be 2 years in his deal, as I said yesterday at Brentford, because they've got an option, it doesn't feel like that one's got much more to go, and Brentford don't feel like the willing sellers that Newcastle had hoped, and it feels a little bit Mark Gahey like. It feels a little bit like what they did to Manchester United, really dragging out the fee, and that's absolutely up to them. It's their prerogative. If they lose him for free next summer, then they've got to accept that. But Newcastle will move on, I think, and find somebody else, and if that somebody else is Strand Larsen, I'd be very happy with that as a Wilson replacement, because he's very good. We've been through his stats, and he comes alive in the box. He's a different style of player to Isak. He can play with and also change the game, and change the way Newcastle play. Its flexibility tactically, alongside players like Gordon, Elanga, Ramsey, and those types up front as well. There's various different ways Newcastle can play around Strand Larsen, so I'd be very happy with that deal, and I'd be okay with 60 million in the context of replacing Wilson, because you just got to accept you're going to have to pay a bit more at that level. It's too late to go and find those players that I spoke about, I think, now. Like Calamiendo, like Gassond, the other players I've mentioned on this channel so many times. I think it's a bit late for what Eddie Howe wants. He wants somebody to come in and just start and play really well. He's match fit. If Strand Larsen signed today somehow, I don't think that's going to happen, or tomorrow, he could start against Liverpool quite easily. He'd certainly start against Leeds if he was in. So I think that's what is probably why they're behind the Strand Larsen deal. Apparently there hasn't been club-to-club talks. I hate that saying, but apparently there hasn't been talks between the clubs about a deal. It's just intermediary, so we'll see how it progresses. But if Strand Larsen is the man as a Wilson replacement, I think that's a really good thing. As an Isak replacement, it just isn't. It's a very different way of looking at it, and I think that both can exist at the same time. He could be a good signing, or he could be a bad signing, depending on where he stands. But to me, it kind of feels now like Isak will stay at Newcastle. I know Liverpool will probably bid for Isak off the back of Newcastle going and getting somebody else, because they'll say, well, you've got a player in now, you can sell him. But Newcastle have always maintained that they need two strikers, and also, crucially, a striker of a certain standard and a certain potential level, like Isak was when he arrived 3 years ago. And as I've said on these videos for weeks, once Sesko didn't come, once they missed out on Ekatike, there wasn't really anybody else of that level, so they had to move on, and it does feel like Newcastle have got that message. So Strand Larsen comes in as a Wilson replacement. That's a very, very good deal in my mind. Quickly, I am recording this before Eddie Howe speaks, so maybe something will break from his press conference and I'll be pod bombed, and hopefully not, but I am going to preview the Liverpool game, and I've gone for the same 11 as last week at Aston Villa, as you can see on the screen right now, for this game, because there's not really much wrong with the other players. The only thing that really was wrong with the performance was up front, and Anthony Gordon has nobody else to replace him yet. No strikers come in, so Gordon will lead the line again. It's going to be an incredible game. I've never felt like a game has so much narrative in a negative and angry sense from one club to another, and it's going to be, hopefully, from a Newcastle perspective, a bit of a bear pit at St James's Park on Monday, under the lights, on a bank holiday, which maybe isn't ideal, I don't know, but yeah, I feel like this one could be defined by the atmosphere, and Newcastle will have to harness that. I think they've got the quality to play in midfield. It's going to be really interesting. Does Jacob Ramsey come in? We know that Eddie Howe doesn't like to start players, but also, crucially, I think where Joe Linton wasn't the right player necessarily, and did and struggled a little bit at Aston Villa last week, he'll have a great time in that midfield against Liverpool, because he can really impose himself like he did in the cup final, like he has done in previous games. Bruno and Tonali are going to be absolutely crucial. Tonali, it was the start of his renaissance and the start of the upturn in fortunes for Newcastle last season, when he played at 6 in this fixture in the 3-3 draw. And that's going to be crucial again. He's never really looked back from there. He's been excellent in pretty much every game I've seen him play since then. Bruno in midfield as well. At left back, does his whole fit. He played in the under-21s in the week, but is he going to be able to usurp Tino Livramento in that position, because Livramento's been brilliant. Trippier's been great on the other side as well. Burn and Cher, they were absolutely phenomenal at Villa Park, so they're going to keep their places as well. It's got a real battle, which is a great thing for Botman and Chow to try and force their way into that back line, even though they are the long-term partnership you would imagine in terms of age and profile and quality and ceiling. I think for now it's very difficult to usurp Burn and Cher with Pope in goal. I don't know really what else Newcastle can do at the moment, because, as I said, their only problem is up front. If Strand Larsen or Wissa were in by now, then they would start up front and maybe Harvey Barnes would come out. But I'm really looking forward to seeing Jacob Ramsey get his debut at some stage in this game, and obviously Malik Chow would be nice as well. But those players have got to really fight their way into a very, very difficult position to usurp in terms of Joe Linton and Cher and Burn. I think I'm going to go for a draw, but Newcastle are lacking the firepower. Liverpool's defence is weak and there's opportunities to exploit, but do Newcastle have the quality to exploit them? They didn't last week. Liverpool are obviously going to be very good going forward as well. With Ekitike starting, that's another sub-narrative, because Newcastle really wanted him. That would be enough narrative by itself usually, but obviously everybody is going to be talking about Alexander Isak, who will not be playing in the game. It's even if he decided he wanted to now, which is incredibly unlikely, especially given the opposition, because of who it is. He's just not going to play, because it would just distract from everything. So Newcastle got to get on with it. I think it'll be a draw based on the atmosphere causing a lot of trouble for Liverpool. They've played in very difficult scenarios before and won, so it's going to be a tough game. I think we'll get a lot more clarity on the Isak situation afterwards. We'll see what happens with the striker situation with Strand Larsen and Wissa too. I'll be back on Monday with another episode of NUFC Transfer Daily and a reaction instantly after full time from right here, because, as I say, I'm not at the game because the press box is so oversubscribed. Back next week for another, mainly final full week of NUFC Transfer Daily. Thanks so much. Like, share and subscribe. And thank you again so much for 1,800 subscribers and 250,000 views. Absolutely incredible. And I'll see you then. Cheers.